Hello, good day and welcome to this session on competitive forces. By the end of this session, you should be able to define competitive forces as well as state and explain Porter's 5 competitive forces and then outline the merits and demerits of the 5 forces. So when you say competitive forces, what are they? They are the factors that influence the competitive position of a company in their industry or in a market and can also threaten the profitability or growth of the organization. Competitive forces is a key tool that is essential to be analyzed in a given industry or market, and Michael Porter developed a model which is called the Porter's 5 competitive forces, and this is used to analyze the competitive environment of the business. So Michael Porter suggested that competition in an industry is rooted in the industry's underlying economics and that competitive forces exist and they go beyond the established combatants in a particular industry. So Porter developed which this framework which argues that the extent of competition in an industry in its attractiveness or potential profitability to any given player within it depends on the interaction of these 5 forces in the industry or in the organization's industrial environment. So these are the 5 forces in the Porter's competitive forces model. They are subsequently discussed as follows. So the first one is threat of new entrants. So in a typical industry, one of the forces that operates or influence the competitive position of an organization is the potential threat of new entrants. And the threat of new entrants is high when products are nearly identical, such that customers can move from one product to another, or customers can substitute products for another. Therefore, the likelihood of new products or new competitors entering the market is high. And secondly, threat of new entrants is high when there is low capital required to enter that market. So if anybody can use their available funds, little funds that they have to set up or enter into that business, a typical business, it means there's a less threat of new entrant in that industry. Also, when there is no government regulation against entry, there has a high likelihood of attracting new entrants because in the end there is no restriction as to how operations should be made. So take for instance the sale of noodles in Ghana. There is no regulation as to whether you should be registered or you should go through certain processes before you establish. The moment anyone gets the capital that they think it's enough to set up such a business, they find a space and then they begin putting up such setup to sell noodles. And then customer switching costs are low. So you go to a typical perfect competitive markets like the local markets that we have where there are many tomato sellers. I mean, moving from one tomato to another is the easiest thing you could do because you want value for your money. So there is a likelihood that anybody who sees the sale of probably potatoes to be profitable could get up one day and decide that they also want to engage in potato or tomato selling. Also, when the market is characterized by low customer loyalty, and this is deduced from the fact that products are nearly identical, hence you can easily move between producers and you don't need to be loyal to one focal supplier. Also, when economies of scale can be easily achieved, when you can sell in bulk without making much profit, it means that the threat of entrance is very high. Then, how can you achieve a barrier, or how can you have a threat of new entrants in a market to be low? This can be achieved by having the vice versa of what we had. That is government policy and legislative barriers, and also current competitors should have control over supply and distribution channels, and there should be high capital investment requirements. There should be brand identity and hard to imitate offerings which will ensure customer loyalty. And finally, existing players control over a natural resource for which there is no close substitute will also ensure that the threat of new entrant is reduced as much as possible. Then the second competitive force is the potential substitute product. A substitute product basically refers to alternative products which serve basically the same purpose. So they result from genuine innovation of the competitor who introduces that substitute product. And substitute product enables switching of supplies, because in the end you will switch or you can interchange the products without incurring much of cost to the organization, and it causes demand to be price sensitive, because in the end if products are identical, customers begin to have power because they would strive for the lowest cost which will meet their need, since in the end those two products in the market serve the same purpose. They will strive for the lowest cost as much as possible. So when there's potential substitute products, there is a likelihood that buyers would be particularly powerful, because in the end products are identical and there's little or no cost involved in switching from one product brand to the other. So this gives buyers this gives buyers the likelihood to be powerful in a given market where there is a potential substitute product. And buyers are mostly powerful when they are limited in number and or size relative to supplying firms. So they exercise their leverage, because in the end the suppliers are more and the buyers are few. Therefore, the supplying firms will be striving for the limited number of buyers. And they are powerful when the supplier depends on them for a high proportion of revenue. So if the supplier's product occupies a large portion of the buyer's revenue, buyers seem to be powerful in the eyes of the supplier. Also, they are powerful when the products and services in the market are typically identical. And finally, they are powerful when there is a potential for backward integration, where there is the likelihood that the buyer will acquire the supplier's business. In this case, the supplier is large in size in terms of the buyer is large in size in terms of the supplier. Also, suppliers might have a strong bargaining power, and this is so when the suppliers are limited in number and or large in size relative to buying firms. And then suppliers have a strong bargaining power when there are few substitutes for the supplier's products, such that buyers cannot easily switch between suppliers without incurring excessive purchase costs. Then, when the volume purchased by the buyer is not important to the supplier tends to have a strong bargaining power, because in the end it becomes a take it or leave it matter for the buyer. They also have bargaining power when the switching cost for buyers is high. This is reflected in the fact that there is few substitute products for the supplier's product. And then when there is also potential for forward integration, where the supplier is large in size than the buyer, and that the supplier has the power or the capability and resources to acquire the buyer. Then another force is competitive rivalry among competitors. And this factor is likely to be intense when there are many competitors on the same level, typical of a perfect competition. When there is slow growth rate of the industry, there is also likely to be intensity in competition. When there is a lack of product and service differentiation, this would also likely intensify the competition or the competitive rivalry in an industry. And also when it is difficult to exit from the industry, this is given the fact that the industry requires high levels of capital investment in order to set up. This likely influences the intensity of competition in the industry. And then when finally there is high fixed cost of production, this also affects the level of competition in an industry. So how is the Porter's five forces relevant in assessing the competitive position in a market? First of all, it uses the main competitive variables in an industry, thereby enhancing systematic analysis of industry power and structures as well as competitive pressures in an industry. The Porter's competitive forces is easy and simple to use, and the forces that are described in the model are also relevant to profitability. And finally, they help to identify competitive opportunities and threats in an industry. It has certain limitations. First of all, the model focuses on profitability, and profitability may not be the main objective of the organization. It also assumes that other factors in an industry will be held constant, and that the industry interplay exists among only the five factors that are mentioned in the forces. The model may also be oversimplified, thereby not capturing all variables in an industry. And the model is usually applied at the strategic level of business unit and not at the whole organization or supply chain level. And finally, the model portrays that the source of an organization's competitive advantage in how is mainly in how it achieves strategic fit with its external environment. How do you monitor competitors and how does this affect the organization's position? In Organizations have to monitor their competitors so as to be able to survive in a given industry in which they operate. So, more time must be devoted to competitor analysis when analyzing the competitive environment. And predicting competitors' actions helps the organization to counter threats while taking advantage of opportunities. And also, competitors can be used as benchmark against which organizations can assess their performance in a given industry. So, competitive supply. Competitiveness in an industry refers to the strength and intensity of competition within a market, and this will result in genuine buyer choice, supplier commitment, and therefore potential for value added price, quality, and innovation gains. Competition usually helps the organization to achieve value-added outcome of competitive supply, that is supplying on time and in full as compared to competitors and what competitors would have done in an industry. And competition is usually practiced in the public sector because there has to be equal treatment, equal access to supplies in a given market. Therefore, the procuring entity has to ensure that equal access is provided to bids or tender requests for tender submissions. So in this session, you have learned about the competitive forces as well as Porter's competitive forces, which is a model in assessing the competitive forces in an industry. And you describe some of the merits and demerits of Porter's competitive forces.